The night scene sits inside the frame of memory like a locked room no one has entered in years. Dust drifts in thin spirals through the beam of a dying flashlight. Air hangs still, as if sound has been sealed out. The rural house, long abandoned, feels more like a silhouette than a structure. Time has not moved here. It has simply pooled, gathering around the warped floorboards and the broken window where wind slips through. The first steps echo softly, controlled, cautious. Each footprint feels like an intrusion into a quiet that once tried to speak. This is where Mira Halden, aged 27, once lived her final minutes. A quiet, reserved archivist at a small county office, known among coworkers for her calm routine and detailed notes. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Yet in 1982, she vanished for 3 days before she was found inside this house, a property she had never been linked to. No signs of struggle were reported, no voices heard by neighbors. A case that opened with urgency and then slid into the static of time, held in storage boxes lined with caution labels. The investigator stepping back into the space now is Elias Rourke, the same analyst who once assisted as a young field officer during the early search. His silhouette pauses at the threshold, allowing the quiet to settle. He treats the place not as a crime scene, but as a collection of faint impressions, ghosts of details that never quite aligned. He moves with a restrained precision, as if afraid the room might change if he disturbs it too quickly. He remembers the original entry, officers moving through fast, radio chatter, hurried steps. He remembers the way the light fell across the floor then, catching a single silver earring near the wall. He remembers how Myra's case file kept filling with notes that never converged. Now, decades later, he carries the weight differently, not as pressure, as silence. A thin coat of dust lines the shelves. The smell has the flat, paper-dry quality of long-closed rooms. Elias stops near the corner where Mira had been found. No chalk remains. No outline. Only an empty space where absence feels heavier than presence ever did. He crouches, gloves brushing the floor, lifting a faint trace of dust that disintegrates into the air. It feels like holding a memory that refuses shape. The flashlight washes across the walls, revealing cracks, old wood, untouched age. Nothing speaks loudly. Nothing points. Yet something here has stayed intact, a feeling that the room holds a detail, waiting to be understood. Elias breathes slowly, letting the stillness settle. He isn't here for noise. He's here for what stayed silent. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. The case, sealed for decades, reopened on a morning that began like any other. A maintenance worker clearing an old storage room at the county building uncovered a cardboard box mislabeled during a department shift in the late 80s. Inside was a sealed paper envelope marked with Mira Halden's case number. The envelope had never been logged in the original inventory. Its edges were brittle, its seal intact. Inside the envelope lay a single undeveloped photograph strip, discovered among office materials from Myra's desk. The strip showed 3 frames, the first faint, the second blurred, the third capturing the inside of a dim room with a figure standing partially turned away from the lens. Not Myra, someone else. Shoulders angled, hand raised as if adjusting something on a shelf. Early officers had documented nothing about photographs linked to Mira. No mention in statements, no reference in her personal items. For this strip to appear now, intact, unprocessed, forgotten, shifted the entire timeline. Elias received the call while reviewing unrelated reports. The voice on the phone was quiet, almost unsure, as if hesitant to disturb decades of settled dust. The description of the envelope alone made his chest tighten. Forgotten evidence in an unsolved file was more than an administrative issue. It was a fracture in history. He drove to the storage level without hurry, but also without pause. The envelope sat on a metal table, guarded by two junior staff members who seemed startled by its presence. He lifted it gently. The weight was almost nothing, yet the moment felt heavier than most. He examined the strip under controlled light. The third frame, the one with the half-turned figure, contained a detail so small it could easily be overlooked. A distinctive metal tag hanging near the shelf, reflecting light faintly. A tag identical to the type used in the county office archives during the early 80s. The same style Mira handled daily. This meant the unknown figure was not inside a random location. They were inside an archive room, not Mira's home, not the old house where she was found, a third place entirely. The photograph, once developed and digitized, revealed slightly more definition, enough to confirm the layout of the shelves, enough to confirm the time period, enough to reopen the file with the classification, new evidence requiring full review. A meeting was held in a quiet briefing room. Elias stood at the front, the photo displayed on a screen behind him. The team listened, the room filled with a restrained curiosity, not excitement, not adrenaline. Cold, focused attention. The case would be reopened officially. The forgotten photograph changed the geometry of everything. It meant Mira had been somewhere no one had previously identified. It meant someone had been with her, captured unintentionally in a frame that survived decades of misplacement. A small strip of film that survived time more faithfully than people remembered events. Elias requested immediate access to all archival logs from 1980 to 1983. He wanted every employee roster, every maintenance schedule, every sign-in sheet, every note Mira had written. He wanted the architecture of her work life reconstructed from the ground up. The shift in atmosphere was subtle but real. A case long dormant had stirred, not with noise but with the quiet weight of something returning to the surface. Investigator examines past reports to identify overlooked details. Elias sat alone in the document room late that evening, surrounded by stacks of files arranged in neat lines across a long metal table. The room smelled of old paper, a dry, powdery scent layered with the faded ink of reports written before digital records existed. Above him, the fluorescent light hummed softly, offering no comfort, only clarity. He opened the first case binder. The edges had yellowed. The binding creaked under the pressure of time. Original statements were typed on thin carbon sheets, still bearing impressions from the manual typewriters used then. He turned pages slowly, reading each line with deliberate care. Mira's last known movements, coworker observations, notes from her supervisor about the routine tasks she completed, nothing unusual, nothing loud. Her world was quiet structure. One detail, though, shifted his attention. A short note describing a misfiled box Mira had mentioned to a colleague the week she disappeared. The colleague, hesitant in tone, had stated she didn't think it mattered. The note had been placed near the bottom of the statement logs. Elias read it twice, 3 times. Misfiled boxes in an archival department were common, but Mira was known for methodical accuracy. The report described her tone as calm, slightly concerned, but not unsettled. That phrasing lingered. He turned to the next binder. Here, he found an overlooked maintenance slip submitted by Mira shortly before her last day at work. She had reported a narrow gap in the back shelving units of the older archive room, a structural shift caused by warped boards. The slip was marked for repair but stamped non-urgent. No follow-up record existed. A gap in shelving, a misfiled box, a photograph catching someone adjusting an item on a shelf. Small things that remained quiet for decades. Elias set the maintenance slip beside the printed photograph, tracing the outline of the shelf in the image. The wood grain, though blurred, resembled older units used in the secondary archive room, the same one Mira referenced in her slip. He leaned back, allowing the thought to settle. Next, he reopened the early crime scene notes from the abandoned house. The initial search in 1982 had been rushed. Heavy storms had been approaching, and officers worked quickly. He read the list of objects found: a silver earring, a loose page torn from a notebook, a faint mark near the doorframe. Nothing connected to the archive. But what caught his attention was how little connection there had ever been between the locations. The house and Mira's daily routine sat on unrelated grids of logic. No file explained the jump in geography. He searched deeper into supplemental officer notes. On page 18 of a lesser-used binder, a marginal scribble caught his eye. "Check office logs again." No signature, no follow-up, a question abandoned. He pulled the entire log collection again, this time focusing not on names, but on time blocks, who had access to the building, who remained after hours, who signed out keys. Patterns emerged slowly. Some employees stayed late frequently, but one name appeared repeatedly during weeks close to Mira's disappearance. Not a suspect at the time, not even interviewed beyond a standard statement. Their role in the office had been administrative, uneventful. Their file was thin. Elias paused, studying the line where the name appeared. He felt the subtle shift, the quiet moment when a puzzle begins forming its center. The overlooked details were no longer scattered. They were beginning to align. The conference room felt colder than usual when Elias assembled the updated profiles. 3 chairs sat across from him, each representing a different name that surfaced as he traced old logs and statements. The atmosphere held the muted tension of a slow, steady reveal, nothing explosive, just a series of quiet alignments forming the outline of something long missed. He began with suspect 1, Daniel Crest, a former clerk who worked alongside Mira in the same archive department. His personnel file described him as punctual, solitary, and deeply invested in organizing office routines. He'd left the job 2 years after Mira's disappearance, transferring to another county. In his original 1982 statement, he mentioned staying late the night before Mira was last seen. His alibi: he had been completing an overdue inventory task. The log confirmed he signed out at 10:14 p.m., an unusually late exit for him. No one had cross-checked his inventory work for inconsistencies back then. Early investigators assumed his calm, straightforward manner reduced suspicion. Yet Elias noticed something. Daniel had filed a maintenance note 3 weeks before Mira vanished, describing minor shelf issues that matched the location seen in the undeveloped photograph. The note had been dismissed as generic. Elias reread Daniel's statement, noting its short, clipped phrasing. Not evasive, simply sparse. But sparseness in hindsight could be a form of caution. Next was suspect 2, Hannah Wells, a part-time records typist whose workstation had been positioned closest to Mira's. Her statement in 1982 described Mira as focused, quiet, steady. Hannah claimed she left the office on Mira's final day at exactly 5:03 p.m. and walked to her bus stop, where 2 writers later confirmed her presence. The verification made investigators at the time consider her alibi solid. But a small detail now stood out. Hannah often assisted in sorting undeveloped film sent from county field sites. That placed her near the equipment that produced the film strip discovered decades later. Elias scanned her file again. No reported conflicts with Mira. No unaccounted moments. Yet her role placed her in a position where she could have come across something accidental, something she kept silent about. The third was suspect 3, Robert Arden, a senior administrator responsible for approving office repairs and managing the key register. His name appeared consistently on late-shift logs during the year Myra worked there. His 1982 statement recorded he had been out of town the weekend she vanished, a claim confirmed by a hotel registry. But his connection wasn't about the weekend. Elias focused instead on the file of unaddressed repair requests. Robert had signed off on delaying multiple maintenance tasks, including the shelving issue Myra reported. The signature pattern suggested more than simple oversight, repeatedly marking items non-urgent, shaped office navigation, altered access points, and influenced traffic through overlooked storage areas. Details that mattered now. Elias arranged each profile in a row, studying them not as individuals but as components of a silent structure built years ago. He imagined where each stood within the archive rooms, the hallways, the workspace Myra moved through daily. He mapped their schedules. He matched their statements to the new photo. Daniel knew the shelving. Hannah knew the film. Robert controlled access. Yet suspicion wasn't built on connection alone. It required contradiction. Elias reviewed their interview transcripts. Daniel's hands-off demeanor. Hannah's slight hesitations between words. Robert's overly precise recollections. None of it signaled a clear line of blame, but each carried the faint imprint of something unsaid. He shifted his attention to the subtle clues. The misfiled box, the photograph's angle, the maintenance slip, the unexpected shelving detail. These elements wove around the suspects like fine threads. None formed a noose, but together they created a delicate pressure. As the profiles settled into place, Elias felt the old case stirring again, not with urgency, but with a steady, silent pulse. Clues emerged slowly, linking inconsistencies to emotional conflicts. The real momentum began when Elias revisited the maintenance slip Myra had filed. The narrow gap in the shelving wasn't just a structural issue. It created a hidden recess behind the boards, a space easily overlooked, yet large enough to store an object or conceal something briefly. Elias visited the archive room himself, stepping through the worn doorway, the scent of old paper hanging in the air. The shelving units, though replaced over the years, still followed the same basic structure as the early archive design. Using the layout diagrams stored in the building's original blueprint file, he marked the exact location where the gap once existed. He knelt, peered behind the unit, and examined the narrow vertical seam that remained after decades of minor repairs. Even after reconstruction, the faint outline suggested the hidden space had once been deeper. A forgotten recess. A misfiled box. A half-captured figure adjusting something on a shelf. Slowly a pattern emerged. Returning to the reports, Elias began linking inconsistencies. Daniel's late-night inventory checks often took place in the same section where the recess had existed. Hannah had once documented a box of undeveloped film rolls that went missing temporarily. At the time, she attributed it to routine misplacement. Robert's repair delays directly affected access to that same shelving area. But the emotional layer underneath these technical facts came from Myra's personal notes, a small journal recovered from her office during the original investigation. Officers had skimmed it then, finding nothing alarming. Elias now read it with a different lens. Myra's entries were careful, almost quietly observant. She wrote about routines, about the soothing nature of order, about the way small mistakes in records could ripple into larger confusion. One entry stood out. Something off with the old shelves, not the structure, but the way items shift when touched. Feels like someone has been moving boxes when I'm not around. The phrasing wasn't dramatic, but it carried a subtle awareness. She had noticed changes, movements that didn't align with her routines. Another entry from the same week mentioned a conversation with Daniel. She noted he seemed distracted, unusually silent, something she found odd. That was all. No accusation, just quiet observation. Near the bottom of the journal, another line. Need to ask Robert again about the repairs. Delay is making some items harder to track. Still neutral, still factual, but layered. The emotional conflict wasn't loud. It was built through persistence. Mira noticing small shifts she couldn't yet define, others responding with silence or dismissal. It created a quiet pressure around her last days, an accumulation of overlooked tension. As Elias pieced these together, he felt the faint friction between the suspects. Daniel's solitary attachment to order, Hannah's careful role around film materials, Robert's administrative control. None had shown outward conflict with Mira, yet each interacted with the environment in ways that intersected with her concerns. The final clue came from a forgotten supply log. According to the record, a set of old metal tags, identical to the one visible in the photograph, had been temporarily removed from circulation due to miscounts. The sign-out sheet listed the person who had access to them during the missing days. The signature belonged to one of the three suspects. The connection was no longer conceptual. It was concrete. Unexpected twist reveals the least suspected person as killer. The twist did not arrive dramatically. It surfaced gradually, like a slow shift in light revealing a shape that had always been present. Elias returned to the photograph once more, studying the posture of the figure in the third frame. The person's head was turned slightly, the shoulders angled, nothing distinct enough to confirm identity. Yet the hand visible in the frame, the way the fingers curved, the subtle tension in the wrist, reflected a habit described in one of the early statements. A small note written by a coworker in 1982 mentioned that Hannah Wells often adjusted objects with her wrist slightly bent, a consequence of an old injury she'd mentioned casually. At the time, it seemed irrelevant, a physical detail lost to decades of forgetting. Elias placed the coworker's note beside the printed frame. The similarity, though subtle, was unmistakable. He then reviewed the film logs again. The missing rolls, the brief misplacement, the role Hannah played in handling them, her proximity to the equipment, a silent opportunity. But the detail that sealed the realization came from the supply log. The metal tags temporarily removed from circulation had been signed out by Hannah, the least suspected, the most softly present in all earlier reports. Daniel had been quiet but predictable. Robert controlled processes but left strong administrative trails. Hannah, with her steady routine and calm presence, blended into the background of the investigation, almost erasing herself from suspicion. The twist was simple, logical, devastating. She had been the one inside the archive room in the photograph. She had been the one adjusting the shelf where the recess existed. And she had been near Mira's workspace. During the weeks, Mira reported subtle shifts in the shelving and box placements. What motive? Elias did not speculate. He focused on the visible structure of logic, opportunity, location, unspoken tension. Mira's concern about moved boxes aligned with Hannah's responsibilities. The undeveloped film strip, nearly lost for decades, had captured a moment Hannah never expected anyone to see. The remaining gap was the connection to the abandoned house. How did Mira end up there? Elias re-examined Hannah's old interview transcript. Near the end, the officer had noted she paused when asked if she knew the old property on Denton Road. Her response, I think I passed it once. Nothing more. But traffic logs from the early 80s showed a pattern. Hannah boarded her bus at the same stop each day. One line of the route passed near the old house. The location wasn't random. The silence wasn't accidental. Elias stared at the photograph again, feeling the weight of clarity replacing the decades-old fog. Not triumph, simply resolution, quiet and precise. The least suspected person, the one who blended most naturally into the background, had been the missing shape all along. The interview room felt smaller than usual when Elias entered. The walls absorbed sound, leaving only the quiet scrape of the chair as he sat across from Hannah Wells, now older, her posture straighter than expected. Her hands were folded neatly, the same quiet composure described in her decades-old file. Time had lined her face, but her expression held the same ease that once allowed her to fade unnoticed into the rhythm of office routines. The evidence lay between them in a measured arrangement: the recovered photograph, the maintenance slip, the supply log, and Myra's journal entry mentioning subtle shifts in the archive shelves. None of these items alone revealed guilt. Together, they formed a steady, undeniable pathway. Elias did not begin with accusation. He placed each document in slow sequence, maintaining the tone he had carried through the entire investigation: precise, quiet, impartial. The old fluorescent light hummed above them. Dust floated near the beam. Hannah watched without expression, her breathing steady. When he turned the photograph toward her, she glanced at it with a soft, almost distant recognition. Her voice, when she finally spoke, barely rose above the stillness. That was a long time ago. Not denial, not confession, just an observation weighted by years. Elias noted the angle of her wrist in the frame, the subtle curve, the detail that broke open the entire structure of the case. He explained the process, the timeline, the overlooked clues that had resurfaced one by one. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. He simply placed the truth on the table. Hannah's shoulders lifted very slightly, then lowered, a breath she had kept contained. She noticed things, she murmured, more than anyone realized. The sentence hung between them, delicate and sharp. Mira Halden, quiet, methodical, unobtrusive, had seen a pattern forming before anyone else. The misfiled boxes, the shifts on the shelves, the small signs of tampering. She had written them down without fear, without drama, merely documenting anomalies in the world she tended so carefully. Elias realized then that the conflict, the silent tension threading through Myra's last days, had never been loud enough for others to hear. It existed only in the details she observed, the order she protected, the routine she maintained. Someone else moving through that space, altering items, adjusting boxes, interrupting sequences, those disruptions would have been visible only to someone like Myra. He asked Hannah one question, spoken without force. Why? The word drifted across the table, like an old page turning. Hannah looked down at her hands. Her fingers tensed for a moment, pressing against each other, then relaxed. Her answer was not emotional, not theatrical, not loud. It arrived in small, steady fragments, shaped by years of silence. People misplace things, cover mistakes. Sometimes things get moved so no one sees the pattern, but she kept seeing it. She kept noticing. A pause, a faint tremor in the air. She wasn't supposed to. In that moment, the shape of the past finally settled. Not a confession of intent, not a detailed recounting, but an acknowledgement, quiet, restrained, chilling in its simplicity. A recognition that Myra had seen too much of something someone wanted hidden. A detail that spiraled into something irreversible. Elias felt no surge of triumph, only the calm heaviness that comes when a case reaches clarity. Justice, when viewed up close, was mechanical, precise movements, aligned evidence, structured steps. But truth, in its raw form, carried a different weight. The arrest was formal, handled with professionalism. No loud confrontation, no spectacle. Hannah complied without resistance. She stood, hands steady, expression unreadable. The hallway outside the interview room felt colder as she walked through it, escorted by officers who did not speak. The town reacted with quiet disbelief when the news spread. Hannah Wells, a figure so stable, so understated, had never existed within the frame of early suspicion. Her name had appeared in reports, yes, but faintly, without tension. Many struggled to reconcile their memory of her with the evidence presented. The final reports were written with meticulous care. Elias completed each section with the same analytical precision he applied to every case. He logged each clue, each timeline, each supporting detail. He included the photograph, the maintenance slip, the supply logs, and the overlooked notes in Myra's journal. Everything fit now. Everything aligned. Yet alignment didn't create closure. In the weeks that followed, Elias returned to the abandoned house alone, stepping through the doorway with the same silence he carried on his first night back. The air inside remained stagnant, thick with the scent of old dust and wood softened by age. Nothing had changed since the reopening of the case. The floorboards still groaned under careful steps. The corner where Myra had been found still felt heavy with absence. He stood in that place and let the quiet deepen. A late afternoon sun filtered through the cracked window, casting muted lines of pale light across the floor. Time sat in the room the way it always had, unmoving, patient, undisturbed. He walked slowly, as though revisiting the outlines of a memory he never fully understood. He traced the edges of the walls with his eyes, remembering the chaos of the original investigation, the urgency that had made officers move too quickly, overlook too much. In 1982, they had been searching for loud answers, but the truth had been quiet, so quiet that it blended into routines, hidden in the spaces between predictable moments. Elias crouched where Myra had been found. His hand hovered just above the floor, not touching, simply acknowledging the gravity of the place. The case was solved now, the file completed, the evidence aligned. Still, something remained unsettled. Not doubt, not confusion. A different sensation, a soft, human ache beneath the clean structure of justice. Myra had been someone who lived by order, by care, by small observations. She had not sought conflict. She had not stepped into danger intentionally. She had simply noticed the wrong detail at the wrong moment, and that quiet act had altered the course of her life entirely. The truth, when finally uncovered, did not roar. It whispered. It emerged from dust, from overlooked notes, from a nearly forgotten strip of film that survived decades in silence. It became visible only when someone returned with the patience to see what others had missed. Elias stood again, letting his gaze settle on the fading light. His reflection in the window merged with the dim outline of the room, forming a solitary figure suspended between past and present. Justice had been served, clean, methodical, structured, but the human story beneath it lingered, unresolved, carrying a question that could not be filed away. How many truths remain unseen, not because they are hidden, but because no one knows where to look? The house answered with silence. Elias stepped outside, the evening air cool as the sun lowered behind the open fields. The road stretched ahead in a long, empty line. He paused before closing the door behind him, glancing once more into the stillness inside. Truth had surfaced, but it had taken decades to rise through dust, memory, and quiet mistakes. He walked toward his car with measured strides. No triumph, no relief, only the steady, restrained calm of someone who understands that closure is rarely complete and that the world often conceals its deepest answers in faint, almost invisible details. As he drove away, the abandoned house receded into the distance, blending into the muted horizon. The case was closed. The file would be stored. The town would adjust. But in the quiet space between duty and reflection, Elias carried the truth with him. A reminder that the surface of things often tells only a fraction of the story, and that seeing clearly requires more than evidence. It requires attention, patience, and the willingness to listen to silence